What's going on, Tamers? East here, and hello 2025 Meta Reports. We're finally back covering the weekly happenings of the Digimon card game over here in Asia, and just a bit of an update where we left off last year. So EX08 released over in Asia. It very much felt like the Galantmon show, with the new secret rares of Galantmon X Antibody propelling that deck to far greater heights than it had ever seen, as well as the inclusion of the very good generic medieval Galantmon. Something tells me that within the next couple of months, we may be speaking about medieval Galantmon with the same level of vitriol that we speak about Ruin Mode with, so get your pitchforks ready, folks. But as we technically wrap up, I think, is it week 6 for this set over here in Asia? Yeah, I think it's week 6. I think that tide may be changing. And I think this info is especially important as we get closer to the World Finals later in March, but also because you folks over in the West have finally gotten your hands on the EX8 cards yourselves. So with that said, for the first time in 2025, let's take a look at some event results, a couple of key takeaways, and a close look at some of the decks that topped over the course of the past week. So I think we're starting off this first week of events for 2025 pretty slowly, honestly, with only a couple of event results actually being published. But next week we'll see the kickoff of more events, from the World's Qualifiers in Malaysia to the Super Tamer battles here happening in Japan, both 1v1s and 3v3s. And I think that the biggest theme so far going into this new year is that Galantmon is starting to slide as players are finding ways to fight against him, or they're just choosing decks that have better matchup spreads overall. When you take a look at something like Velgar Loop or Red Hybrid, those are very popular choices right now. I think one of the reasons for this is that they have incredible flexibility. You can include pretty much any tech cards that you might need to, because the deck is the core for the deck is so relatively tight. Additionally, you've got incredible speed and firepower for both those decks, and they also have the ability to leave no Digimon on the board for your opponent to interact with. Probably the most interesting thing to come out of this break, though, is the little Lunamon you see there at the champion level, though. The Galaxy Toolbox, utilizing cards like Dinomon and Medieval Galantmon, has gotten really popular within the last week. Outside of those big revelations, a lot of the lists here are decks we've seen before. I think one interesting tidbit is the pop-up of Ancient Garurumon again. Even at my own locals, I was like, oh, I saw someone playing, I was like, oh, that's interesting. People are going back to this. Or something like Red Hybrid or Purple Hybrid. Things like Finnerlugamon are staples right now in the game, pretty much in any country you go to. Periodramon is still very strong. Shoutouts to Onion over there in North America for winning the Nationals with 7 great Demon Lores. We also saw that pop up over here in Asia as well. Maybe someone was feeling inspired. And finally, other lists like Beelzemon, Magnamon Armor, which I think has seen a significant drop off with the popularity of Galantmon, as Galantmon X is really good at dismantling that big stack. Pyramidimon, one of my favorite decks for the game right now, as well as Talonrud Loop, which has even more scary innovations happening over this break. We'll definitely take a look at this deck later on, so stay tuned. And finally, Tyrant Kabuterimon, Crossheart, and of course the big bad wolf himself, Mirage Galgamon. With the increase in popularity of the Galaxy Toolbox this past week in Japan, I definitely wanted to cover this deck in today's video. The Galaxy Toolbox's lower end, featuring its generic engine with cards like Lunamon to help you gain memory and quickly cycle up to your level 6s, is pretty set at this point. Everything from like the level 3s to the level 5s I think are mostly set in stone. What is more interesting, I think, right now is how the top end for this deck has evolved. Like I mentioned before, pretty much every level 6 in this deck has some restrictive property, whether it's the big bad wolf himself, Mirage Galgamon, to tax draws, or Hexablaumon to free Digimon with little to no sources. The list also features the new additions of Dinomon to force attacks into your board rather than into security, and then be able to revenge kill using his on-play deletion effect and using his keyword effect, Fortitude. And you can also add the new Medieval Galantmon into the mix, who, when you really think about it, is an 11k DP sniper when your opponent tries to play anything down. A couple points I do want to touch on outside of the level 6s for the deck, though. The level 5 Garudamon Ace is a nice light form of defense, as well as a way to play out your memory setting Tamer for free, the Ko and Sayo here. On the topic of the Ko and Sayo, it seems like this is mostly for memory setting. Their effect lets you cycle a Nightclaw Light Fang Digimon to the bottom of its own sources, and then you can evolve into another Digimon for free. However, this list doesn't run any level 6 Nightclaw Light Fang cards, so there's no way to go from a level 6 like Apollomon to something like, a Dinomon. Although I have seen some lists run the Apollomon just because he is a pretty heavy hitter, along with the fact that he can cycle into another level 6 if need be. And turning my attention to the options for just a moment, while I think this deck does have some great ways to cycle through the deck with cards like the level 4 Lekismon, Pheramon, and Galgamon, the one-of the Wisteria Memory Boost is a fantastic addition just because it lets you get literally any Digimon from the deck here. With some of the recent evolutions in the Galaxy Toolbox list, if you're the kind of player who wants to be ready for any situation, definitely give this list a try. So towards the end of last year, Talonrud Mod Loop became a pretty scary deck with its ability to immediately generate huge boards of like 5 or 6 Digimon at one time, and also put your opponent under a blanket -5 or 10k DP thanks to the Shine Greymon Ruin mode. The issue at that time was that the deck sometimes suffered from really bad draws where the hands were nearly unplayable. The evolution came though when players swapped over from a yellow base to a red base, including a bunch of the red cheap draw cards as a way to better find the pieces they were missing and execute their game plan. And this list is a good good example of that, especially when you take a look at the level 2s with the Digimon and the level 3 is Gidomon. This is a combo that for just 2 cards allows you to draw 3, and the Digimon also gives you the color switch you need for things like the 2-cost Fireball option card, as well as the 2-cost Hero of the Skies option card, both of which allow you to also just draw 2 for 2 memory. This list does particularly seem a little gamble heavy though, foregoing some of the memory boosts or training cards in favor of 4 copies of the blue card option to search out the top 5 cards of your deck and then evolve for free essentially. And this list is especially diabolical not only for the staple ruin modes there at the level 7s, but also the 2 copies of the Deep Saver's Aegis-Dramon. He's just a great way to remove 14 costs from the board whenever you evolve into him, whether you DNA or not. But he's also got that really nasty all turns effect where whenever you have 1 memory or less, your opponent doesn't get on play effects. Honestly, I'm kind of surprised they didn't have to just throw in a Medieval Gallantmon or 2 in there just as a way to shoot virtually any card in the game once you've got the Ruin Mode blanket down, at least one of them anyway. Or, you know, you've got the Aegis-Dramon active and they get no on play effects. And so it really feels like the weaknesses for this deck are getting shored up pretty quickly, and players are pushing it even further with new optimizations. I cannot wait to see where this deck goes next. Each week I allow my champion level and higher YouTube members to vote on decks they want to see featured in these Meta Report videos, and of course this week they voted to see Gallantmon X. Also rest in peace 7 Great Demon Lords. But if you'd like to vote on decks you want to see covered in these kinds of videos, as well as some other cool perks and bonuses like early access to my content and access to my stream VODs, consider becoming a YouTube channel member as well. I just want to give a big thank you to all the folks who do help support the channel, and with that let's take a look at Gallantmon. Gallantmon is a deck that still feels a little bit all over the place. With such a buffet of good cards to choose from, players are sampling a little bit of everything and kind of just tossing it into the deck, and this list is no exception. Breaking down the list level by level, the level 3s are focused mostly on the search cards with, 8 cards in this case being the Gigamon from I think EX2 as well as the Gigamon X antibody from the EX8 set. There's also a couple copies of the EX4 Gigamon here thrown into the mix as a way to, in the late game, play him down and immediately gain Rush, and then you can warp into your Gallantmon thanks to the BT17 Takato, and then you can get big swings and potentially go into a Gallantmon X that way. The level 4s feature the invaluable Growlmon from BT19 as a way to play down your Takato Tamers for free, in tandem with the Growlmon X antibody as a way to cycle through more cards, and if you have that Growlmon in Inheritance, you can play a Gigamon down whenever he's deleted. Some folks are still trying to include like a starter deck Growlmon in these decks. You see the 1 copy here as a way to gain more advantage off of deleting Digimon, but the lists are so tight sometimes you're not going to see this guy at all. This deck also features a couple copies of the Black War Growlmon cards, and while I think that card is fantastic, a word of caution. Keep in mind, you cannot evolve Black War Growlmon into a Growlmon X antibody, nor can you use it for the warp effect of the Takato Tamer from BT17. Actually, one of the reasons that my opponent lost this week at Locals is because he only had Black Growlmon in the trash and he couldn't use the Takato effect to warp, and so he couldn't play anything big down and counter my own Gallantmon X. Again, it's a really tough balancing act, so just be careful. The level 5s feature the BT12 War Growlmon, my personal favorite choice for the level 5s in this deck, as a way to get a quick snipe, maybe a cheap evolve, but also a way to get memory back whenever your opponent doesn't play anything on board. This is a good counterbalance to all the +1 on deletion effects you get from the X antibody cards. If your opponent has nothing to interact with, in the case of Velgar Loop or Red Hybrid, then you can use this as a way to gain memory. The new War Growlmon X is honestly such a goated card, giving you the bounce protection, DP buffs, a big destruction effect, and most importantly, the no stringed attacks, very promiscuous security attack +1 in Inheritance. Looking at the level 6s, this deck has maxed out on the Gallantmon X antibodies, where I think most lists are running like 3. This guy said, no, I'm going to push it even further, because that's like the best card in the deck at this point, with 4 Gallantmons, one being the BT13 as a cheap way to play down late in the game, as well as the BT17 Gallantmon, who can give you huge DP buffs if your opponent doesn't have a board. Something like, 6,000 plus the 8,000 you're going to get from Gallon X, plus the potential 3,000 from the War Growlmon X antibody as well. Whew, you're looking at an easy like 27, 28,000. Wait a second, hold on, Seiji. I think I said 27, 28. I think that's wrong. Let me see. 12k base, plus 8,000 from the Gallon X, plus 6,000 from the Gallants themselves. That's 14. That puts me at 26. Plus 3 from the War Growlmon. Yeah, 29. All right, not exact, but big numbers. Looking at the options, I think some players tend to go with a mix of the regular X antibody and the protoform. This list opts to only use the protoform, however, as a way to get reduced evolution costs, as well as later on, when your stack is destroyed, you can recycle a piece, add it back to hand from your sources, and then also put the X antibody option on your security as a way to recover. There are some considerations, I think, though, for the regular X antibody card. For example, if you have a BT12 War Growlmon on the board, you can evolve into it to tip memory over to your opponent's side of the board, and then you can use the X antibody and the Toxo Tamer, rest the Toxo Tamer or get Blitz, and then attack with it, and then evolve again. And then with that BT12 Wargreymon in sources now, at the end of the attack, you can get that 2 memory to either tip the memory back over to keep your turn, or to choke your opponent out with a 1 or 2 memory. Taking a look at the Digi Eggs, the level 2s for just a moment, I think that this list does have some pretty strange choices. The BT12 Digimon as a way to raise your deletion thresholds by 1000 is actually pretty rarely used in my experience or what I've seen. I think most folks are opting to go with the EX2 Digimon as a way to just draw more cards. However, I have seen some lists go with the BT17 Digimon as a way to spin an extra memory. In a deck where the protection for your Galamon X antibody is wholly focused on the memory gauge, being able to spin that 1 extra memory to give him his Mario Kart Power Star is so important. And so for the folks in the West who are just getting your hands on Gallantmon, I know it might be tough with so many cards available. Maybe this can be a good starting point for some folks, and then you can build and evolve it from there. And so with that, we're going to bring week 6 of the EX08 Chain of Liberation meta report to a close over here in Asia. I know some folks were asking in the comments what the list that I won locals with looks like this week for Gallantmon, and Sage, you do me a favor, and can you put that somewhere up on screen? If you have any questions about why I included cards or didn't include cards or ratios, feel free to put those down in the comments and I'll answer them when I can. Keep in mind, this does include a couple copies of BT19 cards, which might be hard to get your hands on considering they're not available in the West right now, but I still think it is a good starting point. Anyways, folks, I'm going to get out of here. Before you get out of here, do me a favor, hit the subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.